Jill Evans, Plaid Cymru member for Wales, you've hosted this presentation of the University of Wales Bangor's development of an ability to dispose of fallen stock on farms. It's quite an exciting development. Wales leading the world.
It certainly is, and the One Wales government made a commitment to try and get an exemption for Wales from this fallen stock legislation, because it was causing so much trouble and expense for farmers in Wales. And we tried hard with that, but it was going to be a very, very difficult task. But then with the development of this system at Bangor, there was suddenly an alternative, which was having this container to keep the carcasses in on farm until the waste needed to be disposed of. And there's been fantastic interest from lots of different countries, because this is not just causing problems in Wales, but right across Europe. Everybody's concerned about security, about safety, about hygiene, and this is a system which actually not only provides all the answers to that, but provides an improvement on what we've got already.
And presumably in Wales's case, disposing of dead stock, particularly sheep, you've got a lot of sheep running loose on hills, mountains, hard to spot, hard to find. They can fall down a crevasse, they can drop down dead, and nobody can find them for days. I mean, this is a problem that doesn't exist in lots of the rest of Europe, presumably.
Well, that's true, and that's why on a lot of European legislation, as we've seen recently, the particular conditions we have in Wales and the nature of farming in Wales makes it very difficult for us to implement that. And so from that kind of experience and from the expertise that we have in the university in Bangor in this case, with the support of the Welsh Assembly Government, we were actually able to come up with something that everybody, including the European Commission, is looking at very favourably. And as you say, it's made in Wales, and it's another example of where Wales is actually establishing itself and raising its profile on the European stage.
And in fact, even the legislation now contains a clause. I mean, it's not finalised. I realise it hasn't gone through the final stages yet, but it now contains a containment clause. So it does allow for this as a method of disposal that wasn't there, presumably because when the legislation was first drafted, nobody knew about this.
I believe that well, I think we can be very hopeful about this going through, although it's not certain yet. I was able to put amendments in the Environment Committee when we discussed this. My colleague from Scotland was able to put it in the Agriculture Committee with myself, and we have got the support of the Parliament. So now it needs the support of the government ministers meeting in the Council, and it is in the draft that's going to the Council ministers for approval. So we keep lobbying, we keep working on it, and working at all levels. Different politicians from Wales have actually, I hope in this case, seen some success.
It is quite an expensive installation process though, and sheep farmers are notoriously not terribly well off. They haven't been treated all that well by the CAP. How do you feel that they're going to cope with that?
It does seem an expensive start-up cost. There is the possibility, if it were approved, that manufacturers in Wales could produce the tanks, which would bring down the cost. There's the possibility of different farms sharing one tank to split the cost. There are several options that can be looked at. But as we saw in the presentation, over a period of a fairly short time, those costs would be recouped, because the actual running of this system is much, much cheaper than the system we have at present of lorries driving long distances to pick up individual carcasses from farms maybe 30 times a year. And so in the longer term, this will be much cheaper for farmers and much more efficient.